All right. Enrico, ci senti?
Sì.
Ok, we do not hear you.
You do not see
Si
me?
sente? Ah, lo sentite? Io no. Perfetto. It's the problem which is getting.
Can you see me?
Plus the camera. Ok.
Can you see me, Francesco?
Sì. Allora Enrico, can you hear us?
Sì, io vi
Ok,
sento
fantastico.
bene.
Ok.
Non so se voi mi vedete.
Adesso invece lo sento. Prima no.
Mi vedete?
No.
Can you see
Is
me?
it raining? Okay, yes. Okay, all right. Okay, great. So, Enrico, we can sort of hear you, and you certainly can hear us, and we can even see you, by the way. So, thanks a lot, Enrico, and first of all, how long do you have? Because I think you are driving a car or something.
No, I'm in a car, but standing. So don't worry.
Because we are a little bit, worried about. Okay. Also, because one of the very first questions that we want to ask Enrico is about cars, no?
I think you will be asking that question. Hello, Enrico. Jan Petrowski here from The Economist.
Okay. So, let's do some introduction now, quickly. Enrico is Minister for Sustainable Infrastructure in Italy. He has been Chief Statistician at the OECD. He has been also Italy's Minister for Labor. And he has been an advocate of the environment agenda, and even more specifically of this idea that the GDP is not any longer a reliable enough proxy for how societies are doing. He's a good friend to Vision, and he's a friend of mine. And I welcome you to the second conference on the future of Europe, Enrico. But again, be careful with the car. With me, I am with Jan Petrowski, who you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
I'm not driving.
Okay, all right.
In a driverless car, even better. So again, thank you, Francesco. I'm Jan Petrowski. I'm The Economist's business editor. But actually, before I took the job of corralling all the business correspondents to write something sensible, I wrote about the environment. So this is a subject which is, in fact, very close to my heart. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
Okay. Enrico, we have 5 questions for you between me and Jan, but we have an audience here who may be eager to ask you further questions. Among others, we have Stefania Giannini, that you know, Alexandra Ghise, who is MEP for the Grünen and shadow reporter on digital policies of Europe, and many other friends. Should we start by doing some... we basically, the 5 questions that we have for you are one on Italy and on cars, okay? And probably we can start from that. And then we have a question on which are more on European levels, on the supply side, the demand side, the condition for the environment agenda to happen. Then we will also ask you something on cities. Alexandra was particularly keen on that topic. And also we want to ask you some idea of yours on this narrative of on the man on the moon movement for Europe, as Ursula von der Leyen defined the Green Deal. So probably we can start with the cars.
Yeah, go ahead. Start with cars.
All right. So talking about the place where you are now, which is a car, which is not moving. As you very much know, the recovery and resilience plan for Italy starts from a very interesting number that we Italians more or less know. We have basically almost, well, probably we have more than 2 cars each 3 people in Italy. In France, the same number is a little bit more than 1 car per 2 people. And in France, it's a little bit less than 1 car every 2 people. So the motorization rate, the so-called motorization rate in Italy is very high, which is also quite surprising because Italy basically does not have a large car industry any longer, since you cannot consider Italian Stellantis. So the question to you, since you are very much the Minister for Sustainable Infrastructure, is a little bit an open question, okay? So what should we do, and which are the plan of the recovery plan to make this rate more sensible, even in terms of replacing these fossil fuel cars with more sustainable, maybe electric, smaller vehicles?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. And I apologize if I'm speaking from my car and not from a desk, but I'm with my family, and I wanted to devote at least some time to them and to our grandchildren, which are part of the equation that we are talking about indeed. First of all, we have to distinguish between cars and other vehicles. Let's focus on cars first of all. Italy has the numbers that you mentioned, and unfortunately, most of these cars are very old. And this is due to the social constraints. A lot of people do not have the possibility to replace their cars often. Therefore, the average age of our car stocks is quite high, higher than in other countries. On the other hand, we know that cars are especially important to people, also in, I would say, conceptual terms. Cars for a lot of people, including my generation, sort of dream, status symbol. Now, the first is that this approach to cars anymore something describes how younger generations think about cars. A recent survey from
Enrico, it's not easy to hear you. Probably the car is rebelling to you speaking against cars. If you can do some... Yeah.
Is it better now?
Yeah, better.
Okay, I think there was an echo. Okay. No, I was saying that Italians have a quite old cars in terms of stock. And on the other hand, the new generations have a very different approach to cars than our generation. A recent survey run by ACI, the Italian automotive club, has shown that among young people, only 1 out of 8 dream about having a property car, which is a big shift, cultural terms, vis-a-vis our generations or older generations. The second constraint is that the quality of local transportation is still quite poor, especially in a large part of the country. And the third element is that the renewal
of the existing stock of cars towards electric cars is still very expensive. How is the Italian government addressing these issues? The first is about fixing a date by which the current cars, the internal, classical engines cars, have been put aside. And we know that the European Commission is about to present a proposal, a sort of deadline by which the ordinary cars, the current cars, have to be stopped completely in terms of selling. Rumors talk about 135, 140, like some countries, including Spain and France. Anyway, I think that this is a decision that has to be made, I hope, in a coordinated way, European level. The second element is the need to improve the local transportation systems. And this is where the Recovery and Resilience Plan includes a lot of money, than 8 billion euros, to improve and renovate local transportation systems, plus a big investment, 25 billion euro, for improving railways network. This is something that's needed, also because, especially at local level, the question about local mobility is a very urgent thing. And then we also see changes in behavior. The choice having smart working or remote learning by universities, for example, which are going to change the landscape of the way in which cities will work. But I think we will come back. The third point is the degree of preparedness of production chains in order to move towards electric cars. But please do not forget that producing electricity, all the technologies, non-renewable technologies, change dramatically the situation. We have to speed up this. We have to discuss, we are discussing with the automotive sector how to help this sector ahead. Stop here. We have been focusing on cars so far, but we need also to talk about other transport systems, including trucks, non-municipal transport systems, including ships. This is where, again, the Recovery and Resilience Plan is investing a huge amount of money, for example, to go towards green ports, more than 4 billion euro. This topic is something that has never been done. That we need to encourage. This is where the Italian government is heading.
So, okay, thanks. Jan, you want to...
I'll have a follow-up to that. So, you mentioned sort of some of the ways that you sort of focused on the demand side here a little bit, and how to convince people, and how social attitudes towards cars and car ownership are changing. And in some ways that they're changing in positive ways. I would like to sort of broaden that question and ask you at a European level and a sort of cross-sectoral level, so not just cars, but energy and transport systems more broadly. How do you ensure that there is enough demand for sustainable solutions? What are the obstacles to getting more people to actually embrace sustainable solutions? Is it just a question of price still at the moment that needs to be brought down? Is it a question of convenience? Is it something else? And how do you overcome the inertia that is obviously present in any large system? And energy and transport systems are incredibly large and sort of quite heavy, literally and metaphorically. So sort of a really broad demand side. In a sort of really broad demand side look, how do you see progress on the European level for adoption of sustainable infrastructure proposals?
Well, let me distinguish the two elements. The one is at the European level, the second one is at national level. And we shouldn't forget the European level is made by governments. So the two are indeed interconnected. At European level, as the Council on Transport, we have recently adopted the draft strategy for sustainable mobility. And the change of the name of our ministry from Ministry for Infrastructures and Transport into Sustainable Infrastructures and Mobility is a way to mark the paradigm shift that is happening. Of course, changing the name of a ministry is relatively easy. Changing the way in which the ministry works is much more complicated. And this is where we are now in the middle of a big shift that, of course, has to also learn from how the society works. Let me mention three initiatives here. The first is that everybody is asking correctly, what will happen in September when, thanks to the vaccination campaign, more people will be able to go back to their working habits, where schools and universities will be more inclined of going back to the previous situation, overcoming all the problems of distance learning systems, but also where we need to prepare the local transportation systems to manage this situation. Beside the fact that I've been in touch with the medical advisory body exactly to prepare these on how local authorities, because this is their responsibility, it's not the responsibility of the national ministry, will prepare themselves to this change. We are running in the couple of weeks a survey with the Italian Statistical Office asking people about their attitudes in the restart in September, asking them whether they expect to use more private cars or local transportation systems or new mobility, such as bicycles, electric bicycles, and so on, in order to better understand how the cultural shift is affecting individuals' choices. On the other hand, we have adopted recently a decree with the Ministry for Ecological Transition on establishing mobility managers in companies and public administrations with more than 100 employees and not 300 as before, in order to allow the mobility managers of municipalities to have many more companies and public administrations to interact with in order to understand where the world will be going. Let me give you an example. If all companies will do smart working on Friday, for 4 days, we will continue to have our traffic jams in big cities going on. While if we are ready to spread that day over the entire working week, we would be able to reduce by 20% the pressure on public infrastructures, transport infrastructures, but more generally, the way in which our cities work. And with the recent decree, we have also foreseen funds for municipalities in order to provide discounts on the ticket prices for those who are not the working age, in order to use the public transport outside of rush time. So what I'm trying to say here is that we are in the middle of a big shift in respect to personal, corporate, public administration's behaviors, and we have to be able also to nudge this change through non-conventional policies. If I can use this word taken from the monetary policy. Maybe because of the choice of companies, instead of concentrating everybody in the headquarters, favor of having different spaces, co-working spaces spread in the city, maybe we are at the eve of a revolution in the way, especially.
Okay, thanks, Enrico. As always, you are very inspiring, very rich of information, and I'm inviting you to the third conference, which will take place next year on the 11th of June, so that you are here, because the connection is very bad, and we will... No, but let me elaborate a little bit on the cities question that we are discussing with Alexandra, which is very important when we talk about sustainable infrastructure, sustainable mobility, etc. And this is a little bit a question on how do you see the role of cities within your agenda, because probably we also have a problem of institutionalizing this role. In other words, cities are not city council in Italy, and the cities in general, they are not, for instance, is an institutional part of European policies. Yes, they are considered, but we still do not have not even a committee of cities. We have a committee of regions to which cities are added. And the same thing applies to the COP. You know, when we discuss about climate change at global level, cities do not have an institutionalized role. They are not among the parties of the conference of parties. So how do you personally see the evolving this role of local communities, and more specifically of metropolitan areas?
Well, I firmly believe that innovation will be made evident to citizens, especially through cities. Not only very large cities, but also medium-sized cities that are extremely important, especially in Italy. As you know, some studies show that 50,000 inhabitant cities are a sort of optimal level in order to provide a high quality of life. But we have a lot of very large cities, and this is where, even in my previous capacity of spokesperson of the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development, and now as minister, I'm pushing to rebuild the Italian Inter-Ministerial Committee on Policies for Cities, CIPU, which was established in 2012, but it was a little bit lost in translation, if you wish, because it is not working anymore. Cities are indeed a very important engine of innovation and a test for innovation, and also a test for the capacity of institutions to manage complexity. The reason why I'm pushing so much with Minister Gelmini also and the Prime Minister's office to re-establish this interministerial committee is because there are several funds for cities that are not linked to each other. For example, the funds to renovate buildings and neighborhoods which are not necessarily to money for sustainable. And this is where I think we can do much more. But let me quote the report published in December. It was my last act as a spokesperson of the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development, which deals exactly with the and that report shows very clearly that several cities are embracing the sustainable development framework to coordinate their policy. So I'm quite optimistic about the fact that thanks to the Recovery and Resilience Plan, the re-establishment of the Interministerial Committee, and the natural attention by municipalities work in this direction, our cities in Italy can make a jump that's similar to what is happening in other European countries. And we shouldn't forget that in 20 environment, we have also the G20, which means the connection of the cities of the 20 countries, G20, but also at European level, Covenant of Mayors is pushing very much the direction we are talking about.
So I have a question which is sort of about the most efficient way to bring about this transformation, which obviously couldn't happen fast enough and is not going nearly as fast as it ought to. And so you can sort of think about two possibilities, each of them having its advantages. One of them is to basically go for the most efficient available solutions in the world, regardless of where they're produced. You know, the most efficient, cheapest Chinese solar panels, the most efficient American cables or whatever, and install them as quickly as possible. And so that seems quite logical if the problem you're trying to solve is climate change. But there's the other option of favoring certain local domestic or European industries. And obviously in places like America at the moment, Joe Biden has put a large part of his idea of new green infrastructure has this element of American made. And that has its benefits in sort of maybe persuading a greater amount, engendering greater public support domestically, but it has the problem of basically in part concealing another type of policy. Here you're not just trying to solve climate change, but you're also trying to do something else. So it's a policy with a dual purpose, and as such, it might be less efficient, but on the other hand, it might be more acceptable to the broader public. Do you have a preference in either of these two models? Which one do you think is preferable?
Well, this is one of the most, I would say, of the smartest and the most difficult questions I got since I'm minister, because this is exactly the type of trade-off that we are facing. We have put 8 billion euros in the Recovery and Resilience Plan to renovate the fleet of local transportation systems. And we know that Italy doesn't have still or yet a strong production chain, although in the past we had. So the question is very relevant, and it's exactly in the terms that you are talking. If you, in Italy, we have, especially in some areas, the north part of the country, very high level of pollution. And as you know, there are some correlations that show a high correlation between level of poor quality air and spread of COVID-19. So if you ask citizens, I think that they would answer, give me the most greenest, say the greenest buses, no matter where they are produced. But those, the same citizens, at least they work for the automotive sector. And if you go too quickly, they risk losing their job. So I think that this is really a dramatic trend. What could we do to improve that trade? And it's exactly what we are doing. Speak as much as we can with the local, actual or potential champions of this transformation, and tell them that the change is going to be reversible. It's going to be very quick. Therefore, they need to speed up through commercial agreements, manufacturing agreements, and so on and so forth. I think that from this point of view, beside the way in which the Italian media have been talking, in some cases, limited weight to the content of the Recovery and Resilience Plan, completely clear that direction now fixed. For example, what the maybe have not yet understood, at least fully understood, is that the principles that have been made at the core of the next generation EU, for example, the principle of do not significant harm on environment, the projects of the next generation EU, are actually used also for the rest of the budget. And I would like to hear Alexandra Ghito of this. Because Italy will get 80 billion euros for the 2021-2027 European structural funds. That's, as I understood, needs to be spent with the same direction, with the same principle. If this is true, it's clear that the old game is over. So if the private sector wants the future, that it has to move very quickly, and it's the possibility also in Italy, very quickly in this direction. And therefore, the trade-off be to bringing together equity dimension of sustainable development together with the environment, which are both necessary in the context of the so-called just transition that everybody took. Because if the transition is not just, there will be no transition. This is the inconvenient truth we have to talk about.
Thanks a lot, Enrico. Is there any question from Francesco? You have a question.
Hi, it's Francesco Lapenta from John Cabot University. The question is following up on your latest comments and the fact that the transition cannot happen without some form of collaboration. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on the way in which this platform, specifically as a global platform, could be actually transformed in forms of collaboration. So not the theory of it, we understand that it's a global solution, but the practice, what are very simple steps that we could take to move towards these forms of collaborations, not only with China, but also with the developing world, because let's not forget that without solving the problem for the world, we won't solve the green problem, because every society has the right to the benefit of industrialization based on energy, and this energy needs to come from somewhere. And if it's not economical enough, fossil fuels are going to be still the basis of India, South America, and Africa that have the right to go through the same technological evolution and economic transformation that the Western world went through. So what are one or two actual steps towards global collaboration for the green economy?
Another very good question. Let me make a sort of parallel with what is going on with vaccinations and vaccines. I think that the developed world has fully understood that we have a special responsibility, because without helping developing countries to speed up vaccination campaigns, we will not be safe, even if we complete our vaccination campaign. The same applies to environmental issues. Europe represents a minority of the total emissions, and we are doing our best to decarbonize by 2050 our societies and our economies. But the real challenge is to help other parts of the world to do the same. We are not yet at the point where the G7 or the G20 have already established this kind of collaboration, sustainable development. In 2015, I was in Addis Abeba, live, one of the three key conferences of that year. Second was the summit that agreed on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, and the third was the Paris COP21 conference. Everybody remembers the Paris Agreement, but very few remember the Addis Abeba conference and the roadmap. But the two are so in between that we had already identified in 2015 the risks of having a big divide, developed and developing countries that would block the possibility for the entire world if the 2030 Agenda is successful in climate crisis. As I said, there is now much better understanding because of the dramatic pandemic outbreak that everything is interconnected with everything, as Pope Francis said. This is why I think that immediately after the agreements on vaccines, we have to do something like this on technologies for fighting climate change. And Italy is a special responsibility as chair of the G20, and also as co-chair of COP26. COP26 will be a moment where we will be seeing what the countries will commit to do, and we will see how the international community will be able to apply an approach that could be similar to what we are discussing now with us, the climate crisis. So the possible solutions are very diverse. Italy, I think, is fully committed to action, and the preliminary result achieved by the G20 meetings of the finance ministers so far go in the right direction. But we need to take a big step forward soon, quickly.
Alexandra?
Hello, Enrico.
I do not hear. Yes, now, yes.
Hello, Enrico. This is Alexandra Gese speaking. Good to see you. I have a practical question on implementation. What we are experiencing in Germany as Greens in government at a local, regional level, and hopefully soon at a national level, is that what we really lack on the supply side are mobility experts who are trained in sustainable mobility. One of the problems we have is really that the people actually doing the mobility planning within the administrations were trained in times when individual transport based on cars was the main discipline and everything else was secondary. So is Italy taking any measures to promote education, retraining, reskilling of mobility planners, or to have a new generation of mobility planners who are familiar with sustainable planning and are able to do that in order to have these people in the administrations? Because I don't agree that it's a demand-side problem. We see that European cities which manage to offer sustainable transport that is as quick and efficient as cars, people are very, very happy to take it up, like Copenhagen or Vienna, for example. So I think it's more a supply-side problem than a demand-side problem, and the problem is really the technical expertise within the administration. So I was just wondering whether you're working with universities and taking any measures we could learn from. Thank you.
Well, it's said with this new decree, we are obliging in cities with more than 50,000 inhabitants, all the companies more than 100 and the public administrations with more than 100 employees at local unit level to nominate a mobility manager. This is a great opportunity, of course, to dramatically enlarge the number of people with whom urban planners talk in order to make a more sustainable mobility real. On the other hand, in my previous capacity, I had proposed, and we were successful, in establishing an Italian network of Italian universities for sustainable development. Almost all Italian universities joined this network. And one of the task forces is exactly about sustainable mobility. Of course, the main focus of this task force was to help universities to plan its mobility according to sustainability principles. But now universities have developed, I would say, a quite remarkable level of knowledge. And in the context of the so-called third mission, which is the role of universities beside the teaching and making research, officially, in the third mission, in the parameters that are used to evaluate the quality of actions by universities, the sustainability commitment was introduced last year, which means that if universities want to have good marks, let me put it this way, and which means more money, they have to commit themselves to work with the territories in order to implement the 2030 agenda, including the mobility, the sustainable mobility. So I think that over the last 5 years, we have built enough capacity at university level now to face the increase of demand that through the decree that I just mentioned, we are producing in the public and in the private sector. Of course, we have to work hard on that. This is why we are working hard with universities. And the decree has been signed just 1 month ago, and we are really at the beginning. But I think that we have built over the years the capacity at universities level to support an increase in demand from universities and companies in a coordinated way. At least this is the plan.
Some other question from the floor? Stefania, I was waiting for you.
Sorry, let me add one point that I was forgetting. In the last decree we made for sustaining the economy, for helping the economy hit by the COVID-19 crisis, we also put some incentives for universities, for companies and administrations to go accept direction that I just mentioned. So we do not have only a regulatory framework, we do not have only the capacity at universities level, but we have now also created some incentives for those companies and public administrations that will work with municipalities, mobility managers to develop sustainable mobility plans.
Thank you. First of all, thanks a lot, Enrico, Minister Giovannini, and Stefania Giannini for accepting this invitation, taking your time from your family over the weekend. We appreciate it very much. Well, you mentioned your former role, very important role in my opinion, has been one of the more pioneering advocate of 2030 agenda in Italy as in Europe and in Europe as well through the Association for Sustainable Development. I think that now as a member of one of the government that has the responsibility to implement one of the most ambitious recovery plan, at least in Europe, as Italy has been one of the most affected countries by the COVID-19 and benefiting of a real impressive lot of funds from the European Commission. Do you see a real shift of paradigm when we move from the vision that for sure this recovery plan reflects to the impact that we all of us hope it will generate and provide to the country for the next years and the next months and the years to come?
Of course, I'm not in the best position to judge because I contributed, although only in the last part, to the preparation of the recovery plan. But as far as infrastructures and we are concerned, we are talking about 60 billion euros that cover both the recovery plan in strict sense, plus 10 billion euros out of the complementary fund, plus 10 billion euros to complete the high-speed railway towards Reggio Calabria, towards the south. What we have tried to do was not only to comply with the very strict, thanks God, guidelines established by the European Commission to evaluate the different projects. And by the way, I'm referring here to Alexandra. I asked the Commission to publish these guidelines that are not public. They created a lot of headaches, I would say, to our staff to comply with. But exactly why I said, because I said before, this approach should be adopted also for non-recovery and resilience facility, but also for other European funds. I think that would be very important, even for us, in our relationships with regions and cities, to publish these guidelines, where the principle do not significant harm has been very seriously addressed and checked in all the projects. In development, we try to be to approach in a systematic way what we were developing. Just 3 examples. As you know, we couldn't put money on the development of new highways and roads. This was blocked by the European Commission. But with the complementary fund, we put 300 billion euros for an exceptional, in our view, investment for streets and roads, for inner areas, to get them out from isolation and connect them to the high-speed railways networks with the existing highways networks and so on and so forth. So we didn't put any single euro to further develop highways, but we thought that if we do not connect inner areas with the most modern transport systems, we will not serve correctly our citizens, exactly in the name of equity principle. The second point was that we invested a lot of money on the last mile investments to connect ports, airports with train networks, exactly to improve the overall connectivity of our system. And this is especially important, not only for people, but also for companies to be more effective and competitive. The third example is about the transformation of our ports. Ports which are extremely important in Italy, not only in Italy, but ports that need to be updated, transformed in an environmental dimension. For example, through the cold ironing project, bringing electricity to the banks in order to allow the big ships to turn off their engines and reduce, of course, pollution, but also reduce costs. These are just 3 examples to show that we try to have a systemic approach to the plan. Unfortunately, and this was really a problem, Italy doesn't have, since 2001, a general plan for logistics and transport, which of course needs to be made in agreement with the integrated energy and climate plan, the PNIEC, that all countries have to make even compatible with the new European targets. This is why this government is working now on these 2 plans in order to make them fully compatible and fully updated in a moment in which the trade flows and the people's mobility trends will change significantly. We don't know exactly in which direction. This is why these plans are going to be developed through strategic foresight approach with different scenarios, not just claiming that we know exactly when the airport traffic will go back to the pre-COVID level, if it will go back, and the same will apply to other transport. So we need to be flexible. We need to build infrastructures to allow our countries to be more resilient to shocks. Negative shocks, but also positive shocks, because we may end with positive shocks from this dramatic situation that we are living.
Thank you very much, Enrico. I think we finished our time. We had a question on the Man on the Moon movement, but we leave to your family and to your car. We are all very proud to have a minister who is so articulated, so open to question, and we really hope to see you in person next year in Taormina.
Thank you so much. And
thanks a lot.
You are doing.
Thank you, Enrico. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you very much. I hope that you got my words clearly enough, although there was a problem with the connection. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot, Enrico. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.